Okay, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, fresh from our little drive from Lurgan. And it's always a delight to be here. It's a beautiful part of the world. And it's also somewhere very close to the heart of A. Russell, very strong associations. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to speak generally about A. Russell for those who don't know that much about him, just to put him on your map. And then Jim's going to talk about some aspects of Russell, particularly his love of nature and the mystical elements of that. And then Charlie will talk about his close associations with Marble Hill and all the places he used to be around in Donegal. So there's our man. And who was he? Born in Lurgan in 1867, spent his childhood there, then the family moved to Dublin. And he spent most of his public life in Dublin, although he visited America and other places. He was, from a very young age, he got these mystical visions. We think they started when he was running around the Brownlow domain in Lurgan, and he carried them through, and he was always puzzled as to why he was receiving these visions and what they meant. And as a relatively young man, he rejected the whole idea of institutional Christianity, but he was still drawn to find some explanation, some spiritual explanation for his visions. And that's just a little place in Lurgan where he was born. You can see the blue plaque above the door, and there on the window, that's Lurgan today, is one of his paintings. And that was used on the cover of A Woman's Heart 2, I think that one was. So he's still remembered in Lurgan, even though your average citizen probably doesn't know that much about him. We called this talk A. Russell, Ireland's Forgotten Superstar, simply lifted that heading from Vincent Kearney of RTE, who did a piece on Russell, and that's what he called him. And the reason, of course, is that from about 1895 to 1930, the most interesting years probably in Irish history, Russell was at the centre of everything. He was at the centre of the literary revival, art, painting, politics, economics, rural reform, the cooperative movement, and anything that needed designed or promoted. And at the same time, he edited a couple of the most influential journals, the Irish Homestead and the Irish Statesman. He was probably the top journalist and commentator over that time. As a young guy in Dublin, he met the poet W.B. Yeats at art school. And they, apart from painting together, they started writing poetry together. And we're convinced that A. Russell is the reason that W.B. Yeats became a great poet, because he wanted to be a painter. And his father was a painter, John Yeats, brilliant portrait painter, and his younger brother, Jack Yeats, probably Ireland's leading visual artist ever. And I think when W.B. realised that his father was better, his kid brother was better, and now his new best friend was better, time to turn his talents to something else. And he went for the poetry because he wanted to be the top of some artistic pursuit, but he had learned a valuable lesson from his father, which was he also wanted to earn a living, because his father was constantly broke, despite his obvious talent. They became lifelong friends, and A, again, searching for this, making sense of these visions and this spiritual identity, he joined the Theosophy House in Ely Place, Dublin. And I suppose today that would be like almost a sort of yuppie, hippie commune of its time, where all these earnest young people, educated people, looking for enlightenment and truth and beauty and so on. But he spent 7 years there, and by the time he came out, he really did know what he was about. He had become a theosophist, and essentially what that meant was he took on board the central beliefs of theosophism, which were that you had a duty to your fellow man or woman, you had a duty to yourself, to self-improvement, and to work for others. He, given his spiritual nature, could easily have found a life, happy life, as a meditative monk or something. But he believed through the theosophy that you had to serve others as well. And he believed in a universal brotherhood, which meant everyone was equal, irrespective of race, religion, gender, any of those things. So it was quite ahead of its time. He then got a job in the cooperative movement under Horace Plunkett, and he went down that road, and Yeats went off to London to seek fame and fortune, and they sort of drifted apart. AE went around the country setting up cooperative banks all over the place, notably here in Donegal, the Temple Crone one, which is still very much on the go in Dunglow, where he persuaded the first Pat to cope to get going with that. But overall, across his lifetime, he became this central figure to all that was happening in Ireland. And there was a lot of conflict, a lot of turbulence. And throughout all that, he was a voice of reason and moderation. There's him and Yeats. Already Yeats, to Hayes' disapproval, had got the cravat and the velvet coat, and he had a monocle, and he'd cutting a dash as a literary figure, which I had no time for. It's all about truth and beauty, not about career. I'll just go to his poetry. He's probably most famous for his poetry, his journalism, and his paintings. And the paintings and the poems were quite similar. They were either mystical in character, nature, or they were just about the beauty of nature. And you can see what people said about him. I mean, that's W.B. Yeats famously praised nobody, but the one poet of modern Ireland who has moulded spiritual ecstasy into verse, most delicate and subtle poetry that any Irishman of our time has written, and Lord Dunsany's tribute as well. So, but he could also write hard-hitting political poetry if he chose to. And there's just a line out of a poem he wrote. Through his work in the cooperative movement, through his theosophical beliefs, through his love of nature, he thought the rural worker, male and female, were the most important people. They were the custodians of Mother Earth. And so rather than look down on this is probably how he got on so well in the cooperative movement, he didn't look down on some uneducated peasantry. He saw them as descendants of a noble race. And just that little one. And the restless ploughman pauses, turns, and wondering, deep beneath his rustic habit, finds himself a king. And there's the god protecting the rural worker. And that carried on into his, this is appearing. This is just a little verse out of a poem, Carrow Moor, about a lake, actually in Mayo. Why not put a picture of Errigal there anyway? But and it's just the last verse of the poem where the fairies have come out. There was a dark, brooding mountain, and it was all dark and gloomy, and suddenly the mood changed. And you can see the lyrical beauty of his poetry. The great gates of the mountain have opened once again, and the sound of songs and laughter have filled the hearts of men. And the land of youth lies gleaming, flushed with rainbow joy and mirth, and the old enchantment lingers in the honey heart of earth. And of course, our local group, we produced a little book of his poetry, and we used that last phrase there, the old enchantment lingers, because we found that it actually does. And if you go to the places where A. Russell was, to this day, they have a beauty and a charm. The old enchantment lingers. And I'll finish with this little poem, which again just shows how he connected sort of mysticism, spirituality, and nature. Its edges foamed with amethyst and rose, withers once more the old blue flower of day. There where the ether like a diamond glows, its petals fade away. And my favourite verse, a shadowy tumult stirs the dusky air, sparkle the delicate dews, the distant snows, the great deep thrills, for through it everywhere the breath of beauty blows. I saw how all the trembling ages passed, moulded to her by deep and deeper breath, near to the hour when beauty breathes her last and knows herself in death. So that's a taster of his poetry. I encourage you to explore further for yourselves. Quickly to his paintings. It was his favourite activity. He worked at the poetry. He worked tirelessly in the cooperative movement and in his editorial and journalistic roles, but he loved to come to Donegal. He was a creature of habit, and he would come every summer for maybe 30 years, and he'd come to this area and he would paint away like a demon. And he produced what he saw in his visions. He also produced some beautiful landscapes and beach scenes and mountain scenes. And but he got a bit of politics into his paintings as well. As a champion of the cooperative movement, as a champion of rural workers, as a champion of women's rights when no other men were at that time, he carried that into his paintings too. So there's one of his goddesses that he's seen in his dreams, but she's protecting the little rural homestead. That's how he saw it. And here's a couple of men working, and they're not really getting on all that well carrying that log. And contrastingly, the women seem to have it sussed. And similarly, another one. And he painted the women, he didn't paint them as these wee shawly, gnarled up creatures. Tall, elegant, strong was his view. And of course, carrying the basket together, they were cooperating. It was cooperation. It was that theme as well. And then this painting was the design on the cover sleeve of A Woman's Heart 1. Mary Black and all those ones, which remains to this day the best-selling CD by an Irish artist in Ireland. And they picked it because it was a women's cooperative effort, the actual record. So they picked an image from someone who championed women's rights. There we have the cooperative movement. He hated poverty. He thought it could be eliminated. He could remember back, he had relatives who died in the famine back in the day, and he felt that through cooperation you could end famine forever and you could get a much better quality of life into rural communities. He absolutely hated the fact, he quoted, I think it was Ballyhonus, County Roscommon or Mayo, 23 pubs, no library, no community centre, no facilities, nowhere for young people to go, nothing. But 23 pubs, and he just thought, we can do better than this. So the cooperative movement wouldn't just sort out the creamery or the eggs or the purchasing of the farm seeds and so on. It could do more in the community and make rural life every bit as interesting as urban life. And so he went around the country. He would put the bike on the train and he'd go way on all over the place, and he would set up a cooperative. He'd often stay with the local parish priest, who would have an interesting evening talking to him. That is what he did for him. So he set up hundreds of those cooperatives, and of course the one with Pat the Cook Gallagher in this area. And as he moved from the hands-on setting up the cooperative groups to running the newspaper of the cooperative movement, the Irish Homestead, and then later the Irish Statesman. And he wrote really knowledgeably and set out blueprints for the future as to how this new state of Ireland was coming along. It was coming along either peacefully or violently. He preferred peacefully, but it was coming along, and he wanted to give people blueprints for what it should comprise. So, the building of a rural civilization. He wrote about, his most famous book was The National Being, saying what it would be if you actually had an independent Ireland, what would it be like? And of course, the old division between urban and rural, he thought in a cooperative Commonwealth arrangement, you could unite the two. So he did take an active part in the big issues of the time, of that era. He backed the workers in 1913, the famous Dublin lockout. Spoke on the floor or the stage of the Albert Hall about it. His letter to the masters of Dublin, the employers, is still much talked about. There's a big framed picture of it on the wall in the town hall in Lurgan. But he foresaw, after 1913, he could see 1916 coming, he could see 1920 coming. And he, of course, he was a very active mover in the 1917 convention constitutional convention that was aimed at heading off the trouble. Didn't succeed. He also used his creative talents in many other ways. Jim Larkin wanted a logo or a design or an emblem for the labour movement, and he came up with the starry plough. And the starry plough means all sorts of things to different people today, but when you think about it, urban workers wanted a symbol. Who else would give them a plough but A. Russell? And then the stars, of course, because they had a preoccupation with the stars in any event. And so we went right through that whole period, the Rising. He published A National Being. He tried to bring peace through the convention. You had the general election, War of Independence. Even after that, the shaky deal done after the War of Independence, he backed the government, he backed the pro-treaty side. He wanted stability. And you can see he took on the British authorities over their attacks on creameries and all the rest of it. And as the new Free State was set up, he remained a strong nationalist. He wanted Irish independence, but he wanted mostly to get some stability and some peace. He even helped set up the Society of the United Irishwomen. He ran a silly debate in his own newspaper with two sides debating with each other. Could the women actually form their own national movement? And one guy arguing, oh, they'll never get their act together. This one, oh no, I think they could do better than that. And he was writing both sides, just to get it moving. And so, as I say, he was involved in everything in that period. But here's some of the people that were influenced by him. You know, there's James Joyce, bottom left. A 19-year-old James Joyce was sitting on the steps of A's house when A came home from work very late one night and said to him, is it too late to talk? Joyce had been waiting there for hours. And Russell said, of course, it's never too late to talk. And he took him in, and Joyce showed him some of his poetry and some of his prose. And Russell more or less said to him, I'm using my own words here, but he more or less said, look, your poetry's all right, but it's not brilliant. After all, he was used to Yeats. But your prose is brilliant, and if you clean it up a bit, I'll publish it for you. So he was the first to publish Joyce in the National Statesman. JFK, I'm just taking these randomly. JFK addressed the Irish Parliament, the joint houses of the Oireachtas. He finished his speech quoting George Russell. You know, Van Morrison, Into the Mystic. Van Morrison has acknowledged his influence by George Russell, and he was asked specifically, were you influenced in your songwriting by Yeats? He said, no, not Yeats, George Russell. Patrick Kavanagh adored Russell. He walked from Monaghan to Dublin to see Russell. It took him 3 days. He had to sleep in hay sheds overnight. He hadn't a penny. When he arrived, Russell gave him a load of books rather than something to eat. And he went off. But again, Russell was the first to publish him. And he later won the A. Russell Literary Prize when it was given out. The lady below, Pamela Travers, P.L. Travers, she wrote Mary Poppins. As a young writer, she contacted Russell. She wanted to get in the literary scene in Ireland. She was Australian, but she had Irish connections. And he took her on board. And he brought her up here. He was up here with her in this part of the world, walking around the woods and everything. The relationship was platonic. She was a good bit younger. But he gave her ideas for Mary Poppins, the mystical sense of it. And of course, there's a lovely bit of connection even today, because Pamela Travers was with Russell when he died, a really close friend. And afterwards, Russell's son, Dermot, became her literary agent and helped her sell the rights of Mary Poppins to Disney, which made her very wealthy. And Dermot Russell had a daughter, and he called her Pamela, after Pamela Travers. And she had a brother, William, as well. And we've been in touch with them, and we have direct connection to the family in America, so, which is very satisfying. James Connolly was a fan of Russell's. He loved what he wrote about workers, about labour, about cooperation, and particularly this idea that you don't divide the urban and the rural worker against each other. They're much stronger when they unite. Roosevelt. Russell was an advisor to the Department of Agriculture in Roosevelt's administration. He was a good friend of Roosevelt's Vice President, Henry Wallace. And he met Roosevelt face to face. And some of the ideas in Russell's cooperative, sustainable rural communities really fitted with the American challenges at the time. People were dashing into the cities and overflowing American cities with the Great Depression. And Russell was showing how you could, if you invested in rural communities, you could keep people happy rurally in their own sustainable communities. Yeats, I've already mentioned. Mahatma Gandhi was a fan of Russell's on 2 counts. He read his spiritual stuff, which a lot of which would have been derived from Russell's interest in the ancient Indian philosophies, but he also liked the practical stuff about cooperation and about sustainable communities and about peaceful change. It's not essential to have violence to achieve change. And the other thing that makes Russell unique, just his personality. People talked about the piercing eyes. He seemed to know what you were thinking. He was unbelievably generous and kind with his time. A source of tension between him and Yeats. Yeats once said, "George, you only deal with your equals or your betters. You don't waste time on anyone else." And he had no interest in money. And he spent his entire life. And what makes him different from all the big figures of that era, when you think about it, most of them had an agenda where they wanted to win out, or they wanted to be the best, or to succeed, or to beat the other guy. He wasn't interested in anything else, just service and move on. And that again came from the theosophy. And just to show what people thought, that's Henry Wallace, that's Roosevelt's vice president. And he was one of the finest, most gifted, most colourful people I ever knew. When he spoke, it was like hearing a symphony you could not repeat. But you wanted to hear it again, and you were the better for it. He could grip your closest attention as you listened steadily. Never anything but the utmost humility, simplicity, sweetness, and light. May God grant that the Irish may be able to produce, produce such a man again. So that's pretty high praise from a pretty important figure. In 1985, on the 50th anniversary of Russell's passing, the government here commissioned a bust, and the IAOS, Plunkett's cooperative movement, commissioned a bust, which stands today in Merrion Square. And there was a whole ceremony led by the Taoiseach, and they brought the family over from America and so on. And they made 2 of them. They sent the second one to Lurgan, where our council parked it on the back staircase of the old town hall. So we'll get it out in the open, yes. So that's George Russell. Poet, painter, mystic, publisher, editor, designer, economist, rural reformer, philosopher, commentator, visionary thinker. I didn't even mention, Yeats chaired the Committee on Irish Coins in the New Ireland. And Yeats probably would have put some kind of vain symbols on it. But he went to Russell, consulted Russell, and that's why the early Irish coins have like a cow and a pig and a hen and a salmon. And, you know, it's Russell again. He's at it again with the symbols of rural Ireland. And I'm going to talk just for a second about this place, Glenveagh and Kingsley Porter. Kingsley Porter was an American academic. He was a brilliant archaeologist and brilliant at writing up the antiquities of anywhere that he went. And he was based in Harvard. He persuaded him to have a look at Ireland, and he went around and did work on Ireland's high crosses and innovative work. And his wife, Lucy, was a brilliant photographer. And so anyway, they came over, they fell in love with the place, they had lots of money, they were wealthy Americans, and they bought Glenveagh Castle. And Russell used to stay there in the late, sort of around 1930, and for 2 or 3 years. And they were great friends. And if you go to the castle, there's a room there's some of Russell's paintings, and there's a room there kept exactly as it was when Russell stayed there. But what makes Kingsley even more interesting is that despite the luxury of the castle, he had a little cottage on the island of Inishboffin, Donegal, just off Maharorty, and just quite near where that little beach in the middle is where it was. And I think he just liked to rough it a bit rather than have the castle. So on one fateful night in 1933, Russell arrived, and it had all been prearranged. Russell arrived in Dunfanaghy, and he was due to meet Kingsley and Lucy at Maharorty Pier as they come off the island, and then they were going to go back to the castle. And when the boat came in, Russell's sitting there with Kingsley's driver, and the only person gets off the boat is Lucy. There's no Kingsley. He's disappeared. They'd searched the island all afternoon for him and couldn't find him. And he had just vanished. Now, Russell had to do a lot of tidying up. The guards weren't great at writing up the report. Russell had to do that, and he took Lucy back to Glenveagh, spent a few days there with her. She was convinced she would never see him again. But the mystery is that Kingsley, of course, had another life. Kingsley was a gay man, but he didn't really want to reveal that publicly. It wouldn't have gone well for him in Harvard. But Lucy knew all about that, and Kingsley had numerous male partners, some at the castle, and I think there's a corridor in the castle, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's called like the Bachelor's Corridor, where some of Kingsley's guests would be installed. So the theory was then that maybe Kingsley decided to disappear and just start a new life somewhere else. The locals on the island do not believe that he drowned. There are stories that there was a boat anchored off the island the day he disappeared. Kingsley was a strong swimmer, and at certain tides here, the distance to dry land, the mainland, is very, very short indeed. So there's a theory, Jimmy might expand on it, but he could have ended up in India. Lucy Porter continued to write or publish Kingsley's work long after he had long after he disappeared. So there's a thought that he just lived another life. And of course, it was a pupil of his in 1937. Lucy went back to America, and there was a pupil of his who Michael McKernan then bought the castle and did the fantastic collection, a lot of refurbishment, and that's pretty much Michael McKernan's castle you see today. I'll finish on one final slide on AE, and what makes him kind of uniquely interesting is that I said that he was a confused young man, wondering about these visions, looking for answers. When he went into the Theosophy House, he got those answers. He got them in the ancient Indian philosophies. He got them in the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, etc., etc. And he went forth then from that time, from he left the Theosophy House, to just do all his stuff right across the whole spectrum of Irish life for a 30-year period. And when he died in Bournemouth in a nursing home in 1935. He came home to Dunleary. There was an aerial fly past, whatever 2 or 3 airplanes were in Ireland did a fly past at Dunleary as he came in. And the Irish Times records that the funeral procession out to Harold's Cross was a mile long. And it's amazing that there's somebody most people have never heard of, was so popular at that time. He was a household name. But when he was buried in Mount Jerome Cemetery, the French put up a headstone, and even there, more innovative design, first man with a logo. But I moved among men and places, and in living I learned the truth at last. I know I am a spirit, and that I went forth in old time from the self-ancestral to labours yet unaccomplished. Now, you could see somebody write that at the end of their lives, when they're contemplating the end, and what did they do? But he saw himself as a spirit who had done a job here and would do a job in the next place. But remarkably, he wrote that. It's the preface to his very first anthology, which appeared in the early 1890s. But he wrote that line in his mid-20s. I know I am a spirit. So he'd sorted out what he was about. So I think we'll hear a lot more about the connection to Donegal, but I think in his own right, if you don't know about him, a remarkable person. Thank you.